What's up YouTube, and welcome to the Anabolic Outpost, and in this edition I'm going to be coming at you with an anabolic brownie brittle recipe. Now if you don't really know what brownie brittle is, you're going to be in for a treat with this one, as it essentially is just a very thin brownie that has a crunch to it, sort of like a chip, except it tastes like a brownie. And unlike most anabolic recipes that are giving you that chocolate flavor, they can't usually replicate any of the chocolate texture, but with this one you could get that nice crunch of chocolate. And this has really been my favorite way to get my chocolate cravings in lately. And of course, it follows the anabolic criteria of being both very high in protein and low in calorie at the same time. And I'm going to be explaining the macros at the end of this video after I make the recipe. And speaking of the recipe, let me show you what you will need to make this. The first ingredient you will need is going to be protein powder, and as always, I'm using PE Science, and obviously the chocolate cupcake flavor makes the most sense for this brownie brittle recipe. Next is going to be this sugar-free brownie mix, which you should be able to get at Walmart or any sort of big box chain store like that. Fat-free Greek yogurt, egg whites, it wouldn't be a brownie recipe without cocoa powder, some Walden Farms chocolate syrup, or really any sugar-free chocolate syrup will work. And that's the last ingredient. Before we get into the mixing, you're going to want to go ahead and preheat your oven to 325 degrees. Like most of my recipes, I'm going to start this out by taking a mixing bowl and placing it onto my kitchen scale. And I'm going to pour up 77 grams of the sugar-free brownie mix. Now the macros on this brownie mix really isn't that great by itself. When you add it to this recipe, it really gives you that traditional brownie flavor. And you could cut it obviously with the cocoa powder and the protein powder and everything that I showed you in the ingredients there. But I think essential aspect and really makes you believe that you are eating the real thing. It's not cut with all the lower calorie stuff that I'm adding in. Next up, I'm going to add in my protein powder. I do want to say, if you are being risky and using a different protein powder with this recipe, I would advise definitely not using a casein blended protein powder, as it's probably going to rise, and you really don't want that, as you want it to stay down so it get crispy at the bottom. Although I can't confirm this, when I have used 100% casein blended protein powders, it hasn't really gone well as far as with the rising, and I don't think it's going to be any different for this recipe. Now I'm going to add in the third of 4 different types of chocolates that is going into this recipe, and I'm going to go ahead and throw in 6 grams of the cocoa powder. Obviously, there's no leavening agent on this one, as you don't want it to rise at all, so you don't have to worry about mixing the dry ingredients separately. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in to adding the wet ingredients in here. Starting off with the Greek yogurt, I'm adding in 85 grams of that. I'm going to go ahead and pour up 50 grams of the liquid egg whites. The last ingredient is going to be the fourth and final source of chocolate in this recipe, the only liquid source of chocolate, matter of fact, the Walden Farms chocolate syrup. You're just going to go ahead and drizzle 20 grams of this syrup. You can now go ahead and mix it together until it is thoroughly mixed. I really don't know why I remember using a whisk for this recipe. I don't usually end up writing down the steps of my recipes, only the ingredients when I end up saving them for my personal use, and I usually think that I can remember them, not have to endure this absolute struggle that I'm going through mixing this brownie mix together. Go ahead and do yourself a favor and use an electric mixer from the start when mixing this brownie batter together. Now I went ahead and took out a cooking sheet and laid the aluminum foil on top of it there, and you can now see this brownie brittle batter fairly complete now, and it is mixed thoroughly. Sort of like a peanut butter consistency, but nothing like what I left you with when we last left off when I was mixing it by hand. That was a pain in the ass, but I switched to the electric mixer and went ahead and got the texture that I have right now. The first aspect of making this brownie brittle work is taking a rubber spatula and getting in there and getting every last drop of the brownie brittle batter. And if you don't get the last drop, lick the inside of this bowl. You're not going to regret it for that extra protein. You're not going to want to wash this stuff down the drain. Once the scraping aspect of this is done, you're just going to be left with a pile in the center and a bunch of marks on the sides, and then you could go ahead and spread it all around so it's touching all 4 corners of this aluminum foil. Very important that you go in there and carefully take the time to make sure and it spreads to all 4 corners, and it is also an even layer across all the way on the top. Should take a little bit, like I said, but this is extremely important, and don't worry, be patient. You're not going to want to have some soft brownie brittle chunks. Here we go, a nice little bit of camera roll footage before we put this in the oven, and you could see that nice even layer that I have on top, touching all 4 corners, and it is spread evenly with a smooth surface on top. I'm going to go ahead and let the brittle cook in the oven and let it cook for 25 to 30 minutes. This is what it's going to look like coming fresh out of the oven, and there really is no great way to tell when this is done. Unlike most desserts when you could just do the toothpick trick, stick a toothpick in this, it's probably going to break because the brownie brittle is so crunchy. There you go, I guess that really is the toothpick trick for this recipe. If you stick it in there and it breaks, that's how you know the brownie brittle is ready. It's an important step to let it cool for at least 15 minutes, as this also allows the brownie brittle to harden even further. Best way to cut this up coming out of the oven is to just take out a pizza cutter and just go ahead, get crazy with it, make some diagonal cuts. This is how the presentation of brownie brittles should really be. If you've ever gotten it out of a bag or from anybody making it homemade, you know that it's made with a bunch of different crazy shapes and triangles, so get creative and make some crazy shapes with your brownie brittle. This is it. Here is the final product. I have an overflowing bowl of brownie brittle. That was actually a very hard sentence to say right there, and I'm not even going to attempt to say it again. On the bright side, at least it was a good thing that I just said there, as I'm going to get to chomping on these right once I finish up this video. Before I go though, I can't forget to mention the most important part, which is the macros for this recipe. I'm going to go ahead and give you the macros for this entire recipe, although you could go ahead and split it up how you like if you're going to split this up into 2, 3, 4, or even more servings. The macros for this entire thing though is going to be 62 grams of protein with 82 grams of carbs and 11 grams of fat for only 470 calories. These solid macros right there, topped off with a low calorie count, is perfect for a dessert and exactly what you are looking for to have at night before you go to bed or whatever time of the day you want to eat this. It's really going to be both delicious and nutritious, help you cure that chocolate craving that I was mentioning earlier. It's all I have for you today though for this recipe. If you were confused or you did have any questions about this recipe throughout any of the steps in this entire process, comment them down below and I will be answering your questions as soon as possible. Other than that though, if you found this recipe both helpful and delicious, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.